Welcome back, Emma Olivia Stories. My name's Kate. I'm 20, and this happened just this summer when I came home for vacation from university. It was one of those spontaneous ideas. I thought, why not surprise my parents? I didn't tell them I was coming, which made me even more excited as I dragged my suitcase through the familiar streets of my small hometown. I couldn't wait to see their reactions when I opened the front door, expecting hugs and shocked faces from Mom and Dad. I found silence. It turned out they weren't home yet. I was about to feel disappointed when a familiar voice called out my name. It was Joe, my little brother who turned 18 recently. He was 18 now, a bit taller than me, with a broad smile that could light up any room. "Joe," I said, dropping my bags as we hugged. It was one of those easy, natural greetings, but I couldn't help noticing how grown-up he looked when Joe left. I closed the door and let out a deep breath. The house was so quiet, and the realization that I was truly home started to sink in after a long drive back from university and dealing with crowded buses and noisy train stations. I needed to shake off the exhaustion. I decided to head straight to the shower. The hot water hit my skin, washing away the grime of trav, and for the first time in weeks, I felt myself start to relax. It had been a rough semester, assignments, deadlines, and the constant rush of life at university. But now, standing there under the stream of water, I let my shoulders drop and finally exhaled. After the shower, I threw on a loose summer dress. It was light and soft, the kind of outfit you wear when you're not trying too hard, just comfortable enough to lounge, and I padded barefoot to my room, pushing open the door and letting the familiar coziness wrap around me. My old posters were still on the walls. The bed still made with my favorite pattern sheets. It was like stepping back into another version of myself, but something else had been tugging at the back of my mind. I'd been so busy with school and so focused on work that I hadn't really had much of a personal life. The intimacy I used to take for granted had been missing for a while now. I mean, sure, there had been dates here and there, but nothing serious, nothing real. And it's not like there were many opportunities to unwant mind like that in a shared dorm with thin walls and nosy roommates. As I sank onto my bed, the thought stuck with me. It wasn't just about needing someone else, it was about feeling connected to myself again, feeling in tune with my own needs. I grabbed my phone, scrolling aimlessly at first. But it wasn't long before my mind wandered elsewhere, lying back against the pillows. I let my fingers graze my skin. It was instinctive, more about re-entering than anything else. My hands roamed over my arms, my collarbone, the soft fabric of my dress. I let out a shaky breath, just letting myself feel reconnect and unwind after everything I'd been pushing through. I wasn't thinking about much else. When I heard a knock on my door, my heart jumped into my throat and I practically threw my phone to the side. Joe's voice came from the other side. I quickly adjusted myself, smoothing my dress as I called out for him to come in. Joe opened the door, hesitating for a moment before stepping inside. I could tell something was on his mind. His expression was less carefree than usual. He stood there awkwardly for a second before finally making his way to the edge of my bed, sitting down and running a hand through his hair. I didn't know what he wanted, but I figured it had to be important for him to come by. Joe sat down at the edge of my bed, and I could see right away that something was weighing on him. He didn't say anything at first, just shifted uncomfortably, looking like he was trying to figure out where to start. I stayed quiet, giving him the space to work through whatever was on his mind. Finally, he started to talk. His words came out haltingly at first. But then the story poured out. He talked about his girlfriend, a relationship that I knew he'd been in for a while. From what I'd heard before, I'd always thought they were happy together. One of those young, carefree relationships where everything is fun and exciting, but apparently things weren't as perfect as they seemed. He told me about how they'd been fighting a lot lately over little things and big things. Like he felt like no matter what he did, it wasn't enough to make her happy. She'd get upset with him over things he didn't even realize were a problem, and the arguments always left him feeling drained. He admitted that he cared about her, but wasn't sure if he could keep going like this. The relationship was starting to feel more like a burden than something that brought him joy as he talked. I couldn't help but notice how much he changed since the last time I'd really spent time with him. He wasn't the same kid I used to tease or babysit. He had this quiet maturity about him now, this depth that I hadn't seen before. It hit me all at once that he'd grown up, not just physically, though. That was hard to ignore, too. His shoulders were broader, his face more defined. He carried himself differently with a confidence that wasn't there before. I listened as he kept talking, my mind half on his words and half on this new realization about him. There was something magnetic about him now, something that made it hard to look away. It was strange, almost unsettling to see him in this new light. He kept going, opening up more than I'd ever seen him before. He talked about how exhausting it was to feel like he was always the one trying to fix things in his relationship, always the one apologizing even when he didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He admitted that he thought about breaking up with her, but he wasn't sure if he had it in him. I wanted to comfort him, to say something that would make him feel better, but words didn't seem like enough, so I did what felt natural. I leaned in and wrapped my arms around him. It wasn't the kind of hug you give out of politeness or habit. It was real, a way of saying without words that I understood that I was there for him. As we sat there, my arms around him, something shifted in the air. I don't know if it was the way he relaxed into me or the warmth of his presence, but suddenly I was hyper-aware of him, of the way his hair brushed against my cheek, of the faint scent of his cologne, of the way his breathing slowed as he calmed down without really thinking about it. My hand moved to his hair, brushing it back gently. It was soft under my fingers, and I found myself tracing the line of his jaw, then down to his neck. It was an innocent gesture, but it felt charged. I could feel him relax even more under my touch, leaning into it just slightly. My mind was racing, torn between what I was doing and what I should be doing. I wasn't sure why I kept going, why I didn't pull back. Maybe it was the way he made me feel grounded, or maybe it was just the emotions of the moment. Whatever it was, I couldn't stop. I don't even remember deciding to do it, but at some point I took his hand in mine and placed it on my leg. It was impulsive, the kind of thing you do before you can talk yourself out of it. I felt him freeze for a moment, clearly caught off guard. But then his hands settled where I placed them. I could feel the hesitation in him, but also the curiosity. His hand was warm, his touch tentative at first, like he wasn't sure if he should move or stay still. Slowly, he began to let his fingers trace small circles along my thigh, moving higher and higher with each pass. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the heat rising in my skin. I wasn't sure where this was going, but I couldn't bring myself to stop it. Every nerve in my body was on high alert, responding to his touch and way that I hadn't felt in so long. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, his hand moving gently, exploring while I leaned into him, my face buried in the crook of his neck. My body seemed to have a mind of its own, shifting and arching under his touch, reacting to every movement he made. And then, just as the moment felt like it couldn't get any more intense, the sound of the front door opening shattered the quiet. I jumped back so fast it was like I'd been burned, pulling away from him and adjusting my dress in record time. My heart was still racing, but now it was from panic. Joe looked just as flustered as I felt his face red as he quickly scooted back, putting some distance between us. I barely had time to catch my breath before my parents called out, their voices carrying through the house. They sounded excited, worried, and relieved. All at once, I forced myself to get up and go greet them. My mind still spinning from what had just happened. They hugged me tight, asking a million questions about why I hadn't warned them I was coming. I mumbled something about wanting to surprise them, trying to act as normal as possible, but even as we sat down for dinner laughing and catching up, my mind kept drifting back to that moment in my room. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Joe's touch had felt, the way my body had responded. I couldn't help wondering if he was thinking about it to the rest of that evening, passed in a blur. I went through the motions of talking, laughing, and catching up with my parents, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. My thoughts kept circling back to what had happened with Joe. The memory of it stayed with me, the warmth of his hand, the way my body had reacted, the electricity in the air between us. It was all so fresh, so vivid that I couldn't shake it. no matter how much I tried to focus on anything else. Even after I went to bed that night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my thoughts running wild, replaying everything over and over again, the way he looked at me before we pulled apart, the softness of his touch, the way it had felt to be that close to him. It was all too much to process. I couldn't help wondering what was thinking, whether he was as shaken by it as I was the next day. Was even harder. Seeing Joe and passing around the house, I felt this strange tension in the air between us. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was different. Like we were both aware of what had happened, but didn't know how to bring it up, didn't know how to act around each other. Now I caught myself stealing glances at him, noticing little things I hadn't before, the way his jawline tensed when he was deep in thought, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the way he moved every time we crossed paths. My heart sped up a little, and I found myself overthinking every interaction. Did he notice the way I looked at him? Did he feel the same pull that I did, or was he just trying to forget it, trying to move on like nothing had happened? I tried to distract myself, but nothing seemed to work. My parents were busy with their own things for most of the day, leaving me with too much time to think. I kept reliving the moment in my room, imagining all the ways it could have gone differently. What if the door hadn't opened when it did? What if we hadn't stopped? The questions were endless, and they only made me more restless that evening. My dad came into the living room where I was sitting scrolling aimlessly on my phone. He apologized, saying he and my mom had to go out for the night to take care of some business. He felt bad about leaving me alone, especially since I just gotten back, but I waved it off, telling him it was fine. As soon as they left, the house felt eerily quiet. It was just me and Joe, and the silence seemed to amplify every little noise I tried to focus on something. Reading, watching, to be anything but my thoughts kept drifting. The stillness of the house only made it worse, giving my mind free rein to wander back to the way his hand had felt on my leg, the way I'd felt when we were that close. I don't know when idea first formed in my head, but once it was there, it was impossible to ignore. I tried to talk myself out of it, tried to reason with myself, but the pull was too strong. The memory of yesterday was too fresh, too vivid, and the curiosity of what could happen if I didn't stop myself. This time was too tempting. It was late by the time I finally made up my mind. The house was dark and quiet, and I could hear the faint sound of Joe's breathing through the thin walls. My heart was pounding as I made my way to his room, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. When I opened the door, I saw him lying on his side, as back to me. He looked peaceful, his breathing slow and steady in the soft glow of the nightlight. For a moment, I just stood there, watching him, trying to decide if I was really going to go through with this. But then I found myself moving my feet, carrying me to his bed, before I could talk myself out of it. I slid in beside him, careful not to wake him. At first, the bed shifted under my weight, and I could feel the warmth of his body next to mine. At first, I just lay there listening to his breathing, feeling the rise and fall of his chest, but the longer I stayed there, the more my own breathing quickened. I couldn't help but reach out my hand, grazing his arm, lightly testing the waters. It wasn't long before he stirred, his breathing changing as he started to wake. He rolled onto his back, blinking in confusion as he realized I was there. I could see the surprise in his expression, the way his eyes widened as he took in the situation. I didn't give him a chance to ask questions or protest. I reached for his hand, guiding it to my leg, the way I had the day before. He hesitated for a moment, his muscles tensing under my touch, but then he relaxed, letting me lead. The next few moments felt like a lure. My senses honed in on everything around me. The warmth of his hand, the way his fingers moved tentatively at first, then with more confidence as he got comfortable. My heart was racing, my skin tingling, and I felt completely lost in the moment. There was a vulnerability to it, Aonis, that made everything feel so real. It wasn't perfect or polished, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the connection, the way we seemed to understand each other without words, the way our bodies moved together in this unspoken rhythm. Even though the situation was completely new, there was something natural about it, some that felt right in a way I couldn't explain. It was like we crossed some invisible line, and there was no going back now, without even thinking. I shifted toward him, closing the space between us in what felt like slow motion, but was probably just a second or two. My hand found its way to his shoulder, and before he could say or do anything, I leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't tentative or hesitant. It was bold, full of all the tension that had been building between us. I pushed him gently but firmly back onto the couch, my hands on his shoulders guiding him down, until he was lying there beneath me. I could feel the shift in his body as he relaxed into the cushions, his hands instinctively finding my waist. I climbed on top of him, straddling his hips, and the feeling of being there above him with every inch of our body so close was almost intoxicating. The kiss deepened, turning into something slower and more deliberate. I felt his hands tighten slightly on my waist, and I could tell he was trying to ground himself, like the intensity of the moment was almost too much. My hands moved up to his face, framing it as my thumbs brushed against the scruff on his jawline. His skin was warm, and the texture of his stubble against my fingertips made my stomach flutter. I tilted my head, adjusting the angle of our kiss, and his lips parted slightly. That small motion sent a shiver down my spine, and I leaned into him more. Let the weight of my body press against his eye was fully taking over, setting the pace, controlling the rhythm, and it felt so good to let myself have that power, that control. There was something incredibly intimate about being on top of him, feeling his heartbeat against me, his hands holding me like he didn't want me to stop. Our breathing became heavier, syncing with the movements of our lips. Every now and then I'd pull back just enough to look at him. His eyes were half light, his lips slightly swollen from the kiss, his chest rising and falling like he couldn't catch his breath. It was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen, and the way he looked at me in those brief pauses, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered in that moment, made my heart feel like it was going to burst. I leaned down again, pressing my lips to his jawline, his cheek, the corner of his mouth. Before finding his lips again, each kiss was different, some quick and teasing, others slow and lingering like we were savoring the connection. His hand started to explore a little, sliding up my back and then down to my thighs. But it wasn't rushed or forceful. It was like he was letting me lead, trusting me to set the tone, which only made me want him more. Being on top of him felt so natural, like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. I loved the way his body reacted to M, the way he moved subtly beneath me like he was trying to get closer. Even though we were already so close, I felt powerful, but also vulnerable in the best way, like I was completely in control, but also completely open to him.